I've learned something about family, my dear friends. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come with shouts or slammed doors. They come softly, hidden in polite smiles and in the silence of people you once trusted most. Before I begin, let me introduce myself. My name is Louise Whitman. I'm 72 years old, and this is my story. But before I tell you everything, let me ask, where are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments. I love knowing where my words are reaching, because if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or betrayed by your own flesh and blood, then you'll understand exactly what I'm about to share. Now, let me take you back to that night, the night of my son's wedding. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers and roses, music floating in the air, champagne glasses clinking in hands that belonged to strangers. Everyone looked radiant, especially the bride, my new daughter-in-law, with her hair pinned just so, her gown sweeping the floor like she'd stepped out of a magazine. But I didn't feel radiant. I felt small, out of place. You see, they'd seated me at a side table, far from the head table where my son, Michael, and his bride, Vanessa, sat. I tried not to let it sting, but it did. I was his mother. I had raised him. I had given him everything I had after his father passed away 10 years ago. And yet, there I was, watching from the shadows, like an afterthought. When the toasts began, I waited for Michael to look at me, maybe call me up, maybe say something about his father, about the years of sacrifice that brought us here. But he didn't. Instead, Vanessa's family spoke, praising their daughter's grace, her future, their pride in her. The applause was long and loud. When the microphone finally circled toward my table, I thought, maybe, just maybe, they'd ask if I wanted to say something. But the microphone never came. It veered away like I was invisible. That's when I noticed the little things. The way Vanessa leaned close to Michael, whispering, and then both of them laughing, not with joy, but with something sharper, something secretive. The way her parents glanced at me like I was an intruder in their perfect picture. Even the photographer seemed to avoid me, his lens trained on everyone but me. I tried to smile through it, but my chest felt heavy. My late husband's absence was already a wound that night, and their coldness pressed salt into it. At one point, during the father-daughter dance, I caught Vanessa's eyes sweeping over me. She didn't look at me with warmth or inclusion. No, her look was calculated, almost territorial, as if I was already being measured for removal. That's when I knew something was wrong. The wedding ended late, after hours of music and lights. Guests spilled out, their laughter echoing into the night, the air smelling of roses and champagne. I stayed behind a few minutes, watching my son spin his bride around the floor, her veil catching the light. I should have been proud. I should have been happy. But deep down, I felt a chill, a premonition. A whisper inside me said, "This night isn't about beginnings. It's about endings." When I finally left the reception hall and stepped into the cool night air, I pulled my shawl tighter and reminded myself, "Louise, you've been through harder storms. You can get through this too." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just losing my son to marriage that night. I was losing him entirely. And as you'll soon hear, I was right. Because what waited for me the very next day wasn't joy, or family, or even respect. It was the sharp sting of betrayal, dressed up in polite words, spoken in my own home. But before we get to that, I need to tell you why my house, the place Michael grew up in, meant more to me than anything else in this world. Because once you understand that, you'll understand why their betrayal cut as deep as it did, and why my answer to them would change everything. The morning after the wedding, I woke earlier than usual. My body was tired, but my mind was restless, replaying every small slight from the night before. The ignored glances, the skipped microphone, the empty chair beside me. I told myself to let it go, to remember that weddings are stressful, that maybe they hadn't meant it. I made a cup of tea, held it between my hands, and looked out the kitchen window of my house, my home. The garden my husband and I planted years ago was still there, though a little overgrown. The oak tree Michael used to climb as a boy still stretched its arms toward the sky. That house wasn't just a structure. It was our history, our blood, our sweat. I told myself I was being too sensitive. Today will be different, I thought. They'll come home from their honeymoon, and things will settle. We'll find our rhythm as a family. But when I opened the front door, everything I had told myself crumbled. Standing in the foyer were Michael and Vanessa. Behind them, stacked neatly like I was moving out of my own life, were boxes. Boxes labelled with black marker, Louise's clothes, kitchen stuff, photo albums. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My eyes darted from the boxes to Michael's face. He wouldn't look at me. It was Vanessa who spoke first. Her voice was smooth, practiced, like she'd been waiting for this moment. "We've moved your belongings to storage," she said, almost too cheerfully. Then her smile sharpened. "This is our house now." The words pierced deeper than she knew. My house. The house I'd kept afloat after my husband died, working double shifts, eating canned soup so Michael could finish college. The house where I'd patched the roof myself one summer, balancing on shaky ladders because we couldn't afford a handyman. And now she was claiming it. Our house. I felt the ground sway beneath me, but I didn't let my voice shake. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. Instead, I nodded slowly, meeting her smug little smile with calm. "Good," I said softly, but firmly. "The judge will love hearing that tomorrow." Vanessa blinked, her expression faltering for just a second. Michael shifted uncomfortably, finally glancing up at me with a flash of something that looked like fear. I stepped past them, ran my fingers over the banister, polished wood that my husband and I had saved for months to afford, and walked into the living room. My living room. The place where my husband had read bedtime stories, where Michael had opened Christmas gifts, where laughter and sorrow had lived side by side. Vanessa's voice followed me, this time harsher. "Louise, don't make this difficult. Michael and I have discussed it. You can't keep up with this house anymore. You'll be better off somewhere smaller, somewhere managed like a nursing home," Michael muttered under his breath, though he quickly avoided my gaze. I turned to look at him then. Really look at him. My son. My boy who once clung to me after nightmares, who used to slip drawings under my pillow with stick figure hearts. But that boy wasn't there anymore. In his place stood a man with cold eyes, standing shoulder to shoulder with a woman who saw me not as family, but as an obstacle. I felt a pang in my chest, not just from the betrayal, but from the realization that he was letting her speak for him, that he agreed with her. "Storage?" I asked quietly, walking toward the boxes. I opened one. My husband's war medals tossed in with old picture frames, wrapped carelessly in newspaper. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from fury. I closed the box slowly, straightened up, and looked Vanessa squarely in the eye. "You've made a mistake," I told her. "Both of you have. And tomorrow, you'll see just how big of one neither of them spoke." Vanessa's smile wavered for the first time. Michael's lips pressed into a thin line, his jaw tightening. I picked up my handbag, set my shoulders straight, and walked out the door. The morning air was brisk, and I let it fill my lungs as I walked down the driveway. My heart hurt, yes, but beneath that pain was something else, something steadier. Strength, resolve. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that I had been preparing for this day for a very long time. And tomorrow, in a courtroom they thought would never see their faces, their lies would unravel. But before I take you there, let me tell you why this house was worth every fight, why I couldn't and wouldn't let them strip it from me so easily. Because the story of this home is the story of my life, and it deserves to be told. I don't know if you've ever had a place that feels more like flesh and blood than brick and wood. For me, that place has always been this house. It wasn't grand, not by any stretch. A two-story colonial with peeling paint some years, a roof that needed patching more often than not, and a garden that grew wild when I was too busy to tend it. But it was ours. I remember the day my late husband, Richard, first showed me the lot where the house would stand. The air smelled of cut grass and rain. He had that boyish grin on his face, the same one he wore when he proposed to me under the old oak tree in town. "Louise," he said, "this is where we'll build our life, where our children will grow, where we'll grow old together." And we did, for as long as we could. We scraped together every dollar, skipped vacations, wore the same winter coats year after year, all so we could keep up the mortgage. Richard worked in the mill, long, exhausting shifts, while I picked up odd jobs, sewing clothes and babysitting. There were nights when we sat at the kitchen table with overdue bills spread out, wondering if we'd make it another month. But somehow, we always did. When Michael was born, that house became more than just walls and a roof. It became the sound of his first laugh echoing down the hallway, the sight of him toddling across the living room floor, the smell of birthday cakes cooling on the counter. Every corner carried a memory, every floorboard a story. And then, when Richard passed away, far too soon, that house became my anchor. I won't lie to you, friends. Those first years after losing him were brutal. The loneliness was like a shadow that never left. I'd wake up reaching across the bed for him, only to find cold sheets. But I had Michael. He was still in college, and I wanted him to finish without worrying about tuition or rent. So I worked. Double shifts at the diner, cleaning offices at night. I learned how to fix leaky pipes, patch holes in drywall, and mow the lawn myself. Some days, I'd collapse into bed with blisters on my hands and tears on my face. But I'd remind myself, this is what Richard would have wanted. This is what Michael needs. I gave up more than I can count to keep that house. Vacations, savings, new clothes, all went into mortgage payments, repairs, and making sure Michael had what he needed. And yet, as the years went on, I began to notice something in Michael. A shift. When he'd come home from school breaks, he no longer asked how I was doing or offered to help with chores. Instead, he'd comment on the house itself. "Mum, this place is too much for you." Or, "You know, Vanessa and I could really do something with this place." At first, I thought he was just trying to be helpful, maybe worried about me. But the older he got, the more those comments carried a tone, a sense of entitlement, as if he believed the house was his already. And then, when Vanessa came into the picture, it only got worse. She'd run her hands along the stair railing and say things like, "This would look great with a modern update." Or she'd criticize my old floral curtains, whispering to Michael like I couldn't hear her. I did hear. I heard it all. That's when I made a decision. Quietly, without telling Michael or anyone else, I met with a lawyer. I explained that I wanted to protect my home, that I had a nagging fear it might one day be taken from me. The lawyer suggested putting it into a living trust under my name, with specific conditions about inheritance. That way, no one, not even Michael, could claim it without my consent. It wasn't an easy decision. It felt almost like admitting I couldn't trust my own son. But deep down, I knew. Vanessa's influence was strong, and Michael's spine was weaker than I wanted to believe. So I signed the papers, sealed them away, and told myself I'd done the right thing. That one day, if push came to shove, those documents would stand when love had failed. Standing there in my living room the morning after the wedding, hearing Vanessa declare, This is our house now. I realized just how right I had been to prepare. They thought they could muscle me out, treat me like I was too old, too fragile, too naive to protect what was mine. They had no idea I'd already built walls stronger than the ones around us, legal ones that would not break. And tomorrow, in court, those walls would stand. But before I take you into that fight, let me tell you what happened when I visited the so-called storage unit they'd packed my life into. Because if the house was my flesh and blood, then what I found in those boxes was my very soul, and seeing it carelessly tossed away lit a fire in me that nothing could extinguish. The next morning, I drove to the storage facility they had so thoughtfully arranged for me. I still remember the smell when I stepped inside, a mix of dust, cardboard, and something stale, like the scent of abandonment. The attendant at the desk was polite enough. "Unit 47, he said, sliding a clipboard across the counter. "It's been prepaid for 6 months." Prepaid. The word stung. It meant they'd planned this long before the wedding. My son, my flesh and blood, had stood beside me at the reception while secretly packing away the pieces of my life. I walked down the row of metal doors, each one identical, until I found mine. My hand trembled as I turned the key. The lock clicked, the door groaned, and with a sharp tug, the unit rolled open. Inside, there were my belongings, not arranged with care, not even handled with basic respect, but piled haphazardly like trash waiting for pickup. The first box I opened nearly knocked the air out of me. Richard's war medals. They weren't displayed in the shadow box he had once cherished, but tossed loosely into a shoebox, clinking against each other like poker chips. His purple heart sat beneath an old dish towel, tarnished, forgotten. I pressed the medal to my chest, my throat tightening. "Oh, Richard," I whispered. "They don't understand what this meant to you." To us, another box held albums, our wedding pictures, Michael's first steps, Christmas mornings when Richard dressed as Santa just to make him laugh, all stuffed together, corners bent, pages torn, years of love treated as clutter. I knelt there on the cold concrete floor, flipping through the pages, tears slipping down my cheeks. Each photo was a reminder not only of what I'd lost, but of what I'd fought to preserve. And now, my son had turned his back on it all. But as painful as it was, those tears hardened into something else. Anger. Resolve. I closed the albums gently, set them aside, and began looking deeper. My kitchen china, chipped from careless packing. My late husband's tools, the ones he taught Michael to use, rusting from being left unwrapped. Even my old shawl, the one I'd worn to countless church suppers, stuffed into a box marked miscellaneous. It was more than disrespect. It was erasure. That's when I heard a voice behind me. "Mrs. Whitman." I turned. It was Samuel Carter, my old friend and lawyer. He'd met me at the facility as promised. A tall man with greying hair and eyes sharp as steel, Samuel had been Richard's closest confidant. After his passing, Samuel became the one person I trusted with my legal affairs. "I see they've shown their hand," he said, surveying the chaos of my life in boxes. "Louise, I don't usually use words like this, but this is cruelty." I nodded, unable to speak. My hand rested on the shoebox of medals. "But it's also evidence," he continued. He pulled out his phone, snapping photos of everything, the careless packing, the labels, the state of the items. "Tomorrow, when we stand before the judge, we'll show exactly how they tried to strip you of your dignity." I watched him work, my heart steadying. Samuel reminded me that I wasn't powerless. I wasn't some old woman they could shuffle aside like yesterday's newspaper. I had allies. I had the law. And I had truth. "You did the right thing with the trust," Samuel said firmly, looking me straight in the eye. "They can stomp their feet. They can make declarations. But this house, your house, is locked down tighter than Fort Knox. What they've done here isn't just disrespectful, it's attempted wrongful eviction, and judges don't take kindly to that. I exhaled slowly. The weight in my chest lifted just enough to breathe freely again. Together, we went through a few more boxes. Samuel encouraged me to set aside the most personal items, the albums, the medals, Richard's pocket watch, and he carried them carefully to my car. Before we closed the storage unit, I looked back one last time. Those boxes, stacked like strangers, didn't hold just things. They held memories, sacrifices, the very bones of my life. And seeing them treated so carelessly lit a fire in me I hadn't felt in years. As we shut the door, Samuel rested a hand on my shoulder. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "you'll get your home back. And your say." I nodded, gripping the car keys. Driving away from that place, I no longer felt like the invisible widow shuffled to the corner of the wedding. Number. I felt like a woman preparing for battle. And while my son and his wife were busy boasting about their house, tearing down curtains and planning paint colours, they had no idea that the very ground beneath them was about to collapse, because the cracks in their foundation were already there, and soon everyone would see it. While Samuel and I were carefully gathering proof, Michael and Vanessa were busy building castles out of air. I didn't have to imagine it. Neighbours told me, and little whispers always found their way back. They had wasted no time in announcing their ownership. Within days of the wedding, they'd invited Vanessa's family over for a tour of their house. "Oh, we'll knock down this wall," Vanessa reportedly said, her manicured hand sweeping dramatically across my living room. Open concept is so much more modern. In the dining room, where Richard and I had shared every Thanksgiving meal, they laughed about how they'd rip out the old chandelier. "Too dated," Vanessa sniffed. "We'll put in something sleek. Crystal, maybe. Something that actually says elegance." The neighbours, bless them, stood quietly, but their eyes told the truth. They knew it wasn't their house. They knew those walls were soaked in decades of memories that couldn't be replaced with paint or crystal. Michael, meanwhile, strutted around like a boy who'd been handed the keys to a kingdom he hadn't earned. He boasted about refinancing the house, using it as collateral for some business opportunity Vanessa's cousin had pitched to him. My heart broke hearing it, not just because of the arrogance, but because I remembered the boy who once hammered nails beside his father, learning patience and precision. Richard used to say, "This house will teach him responsibility." But instead of responsibility, it seemed to have taught him entitlement. I kept my distance, but I wasn't blind. From across the street, I saw workers dropping off sample tiles and paint swatches. Vanessa posed at the front porch, snapping photos for social media with captions like, "Our forever home begins today." It was almost laughable. Almost. Because while they were tearing through my curtains and planning to gut the kitchen, they had no idea their so-called kingdom sat on a legal fault line ready to swallow them whole. At church that Sunday, a few friends came up to me, concern etched across their faces. "Louise, we saw the moving truck. Are you leaving?" One whispered, her voice trembling. I smiled gently, shaking my head. "No, dear. Not leaving. Just waiting." They looked puzzled, but I didn't explain. Not yet. Let the gossip mills churn. Let Vanessa parade through my parlour, thinking she'd won. The truth would arrive soon enough. And when it did, it wouldn't need an announcement. It would speak for itself in the firm, unmistakable voice of the law. Still, late at night, when the house lights across the street glowed, I'd lie awake and think of Richard. I'd picture him in his worn chair, the one they probably tossed into storage, sipping coffee while reading the morning paper. "What would you say if you saw this, Richard?" I'd whisper into the dark. And in my heart, I knew his answer. "Stand your ground, Louise. Don't let them erase you." That became my anchor. In the days leading up to court, Samuel and I built our case meticulously. He gathered the trust documents, the property deeds, proof of the mortgage payments I'd made alone after Richard's death. He even compiled statements from neighbors who had witnessed Michael and Vanessa claiming ownership. Judges don't like arrogance, Samuel said one afternoon, flipping through his notes. And your daughter-in-law? She has it in spades. Let her talk herself into the grave. All we'll need to do is show the paper trail. I nodded, though part of me still ached. This wasn't how I wanted to fight with my only son. But there was no turning back. They had forced my hand when they shoved my life into boxes and declared me disposable. And so, while Michael and Vanessa dreamed of their future, I prepared to defend my past. The night before the hearing, I sat at my kitchen table, a borrowed one since they'd dragged mine off, and opened Richard's pocket watch. The steady tick calmed me. It reminded me that time reveals truth, no matter how long people try to bury it. I whispered a prayer, asking for strength, not for vengeance, though I'd be lying if I said the thought didn't cross my mind, but for justice, for dignity, for the right to keep what was mine. And as dawn broke, painting the sky with streaks of gold, I dressed carefully in my navy suit, pinned Richard's medal to my blouse, and straightened my shoulders. Today would not be about whispered insults at a wedding or careless boxes in a storage unit. Today would be about truth. And when that gavel struck wood, they would learn, too late, that the foundation they tried to steal was never theirs to stand on. The courthouse was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in spirit. Marble floors echoed footsteps, voices hushed in the wide hallway. I sat on a wooden bench, my hands folded neatly in my lap, Richard's medal pinned firmly to my blouse. Beside me, Samuel flipped through the thick folder of documents we had prepared, his expression calm, steady, reassuring. When Michael and Vanessa arrived, they didn't look at me. Vanessa strutted in first, heels clicking, her hair perfectly styled, her lips painted in defiance. Michael trailed behind, his suit a little too sharp, as if he wanted to look like a man in control. But the tightness in his jaw betrayed him. She caught my eye, for a fleeting second, smirk tugging at her lips, as if to say, "This will be over quickly." I held her gaze and let the silence speak for me. When our case was called, we entered the courtroom. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and glasses perched low on her nose, looked down at us from the bench. Her presence commanded the room, no nonsense in her tone as she welcomed the first statements. Vanessa couldn't wait to be heard. When it was their turn, she leaned forward at the witness table, her voice dripping with condescension. "Your Honor, the house was given to us as a wedding gift. My husband's mother has been struggling to maintain it. She admitted as much, and we felt it was in her best interest to move her belongings somewhere safe. We've simply taken responsibility for what was already ours." The words burned like acid. My belongings, my life, my husband's memory, reduced to a claim of inconvenience. The judge adjusted her glasses, peering over them. "Mrs. Whitman, is that accurate? Did you gift the house?" I stood slowly, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. "No, Your Honor. I did not." Samuel rose beside me. "If it pleases the court," he said, "we have documentation that clearly shows ownership of the property. Mrs. Whitman placed the home into a living trust over 5 years ago, explicitly naming herself as the sole trustee and beneficiary until her passing. There was no transfer, no sale, and no written agreement of any kind that would grant ownership to her son or daughter-in-law." He handed the judge a thick stack of papers. She flipped through them, her brows furrowing. Vanessa's smile faltered. Samuel wasn't done. He lifted another folder. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have photographic evidence of Mrs. Whitman's belongings, including war medals, family heirlooms, and essential documents. being improperly and carelessly packed and placed in a rented storage unit without her consent. This action constitutes not only disrespect, but attempted unlawful eviction. He placed the photographs before the judge, who studied each one carefully. Vanessa shifted in her seat, her hands gripping the table's edge. Michael swallowed hard, staring at the floor. "Do you deny moving your mother's belongings without permission?" the judge asked sharply. Vanessa opened her mouth, but Michael cut her off. We thought it was the right thing to do." His voice cracked. "We thought she couldn't handle the house anymore." The judge's eyes narrowed. "That is not your decision to make, Mr. Whitman, especially when the property does not belong to you." Silence fell heavy in the room. I could almost hear the weight of their arrogance collapsing. Samuel leaned close, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. "This is where they break." The judge straightened the papers, her voice firm. "The court recognizes that the property at 214 Maple Lane is legally owned by Mrs. Louise Whitman, held in trust, with no legal transfer of ownership to her son or daughter-in-law. Furthermore, the attempted removal of her possessions is a violation of her rights. Effective immediately, Michael and Vanessa Whitman are ordered to vacate the premises. They are prohibited from entering or altering the property in any way without explicit permission from Mrs. Whitman." Vanessa gasped, her face draining of color. "What? You can't—" The judge's gavel struck once, the sound echoing like thunder. "This matter is settled. I suggest you seek humility before returning to this courtroom again." And just like that, it was over. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, the medal warm against my chest. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I simply let the truth settle into the silence. Michael glanced at me then, his eyes glassy, his face pale. For the first time, I saw the boy he used to be flicker in his expression, frightened, small, lost. But it was only a flicker. He looked away quickly, following Vanessa as she stormed out of the courtroom, her heels striking angrily against the floor. Samuel gathered our papers with a satisfied nod. "Justice served," he said quietly. And as we walked out into the sunlight, the courthouse doors heavy behind us, I felt a strength I hadn't felt in years. They had tried to erase me, to strip me of my dignity, my history, my home. But they had underestimated me. And now, they had nothing. The order came down faster than even Samuel expected. Within 48 hours of the ruling, Michael and Vanessa were given notice to vacate the house. Neighbors watched as the moving truck pulled up, the same one that had once carried my belongings to storage. This time, though, it was their boxes being hauled out, their furniture wrapped and stacked. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I stood on the porch, not to gloat, but to bear witness. This was my home, and I needed to see the parasites removed with my own eyes. Vanessa avoided my gaze entirely. Her lips were pursed so tight they were almost white, her hands fluttering as she barked orders at the movers. Every so often she would glare at Michael, muttering sharply under her breath. "Michael, my son." He wouldn't look at me either. His shoulders slumped, his eyes glued to the ground as he carried box after box to the truck. Not once did he speak to me, not even a goodbye. And yet, in the pit of my stomach, I knew he wanted to. I saw it in the way he hesitated at the doorway, the way his hand lingered on the banister as though remembering his childhood. But Vanessa's shadow loomed large, and whatever scraps of loyalty remained in him were buried under her scorn. When the truck finally pulled away, leaving the house empty again, I closed the door behind me. The silence inside was heavy, echoing through the halls. Their perfume still lingered faintly, mixed with the scent of fresh paint samples they had never gotten to use. For a moment, I leaned against the door, eyes closed. It wasn't triumph I felt. It wasn't joy. It was something harder to name. Grief, yes, but also relief. I hadn't just lost my son. I had lost the illusion of who he was. I walked through the house slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the memories embedded in every corner. In the living room, I opened a box Samuel had retrieved for me from storage, the one with the photo albums. I spread them across the coffee table, page after page of the life Richard and I had built. There was Michael, smiling with cake smeared across his face at his 3rd birthday. Michael with his father, holding a fishing pole twice his size. Michael at graduation, pride in his eyes. Where had that boy gone? Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to keep turning pages. Because though my son had betrayed me, though he had chosen greed and arrogance over love, those memories were still real. Richard and I had given our best, and nothing could erase that truth. That night, I called Samuel. "I don't want to press criminal charges," I told him. "Not for the eviction attempt, not for damages. I don't want a drawn-out war. I just want peace." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're a bigger woman than they deserve, Louise. But I understand we agreed that Michael and Vanessa would be cut from any future inheritance. The trust would ensure they never laid hands on this house again. If they couldn't honor their family while I was alive, they certainly wouldn't profit after I was gone. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. In the weeks that followed, neighbors stopped by often. They brought casseroles, pies, even fresh flowers for the garden. "We were so worried about you," one of them admitted. "We thought they'd push you out. But you showed them." Their kindness reminded me that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who stand by you when others turn away. I filled my days with small rituals. I polished Richard's medals and placed them back in their shadow box. I replanted the rose bushes out front, pruning away the dead stems. I even hung new curtains in the dining room, bright and cheerful, a reminder that the house still had life left in it. And though the ache for my son lingered, it no longer defined me. I had my dignity, my home, my truth. Vanessa might have strutted around thinking she'd won. Michael might have chosen her whispers over my voice. But in the end, the house still stood, and so did I. But the story doesn't end there, because in reclaiming my house, I also reclaimed something else: my voice, my power, my right to decide what family truly means. And that decision would shape the final chapter of this story. The house was quiet in the weeks that followed. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of grief, but the kind of stillness that comes after a storm has passed. A calmness that feels almost sacred. Each morning, I brewed my tea and sat by the window, watching the sunlight fall across the oak tree in the yard. That tree had seen everything: birthdays, scraped knees, summer picnics, and now this battle for belonging. Its branches swayed gently in the breeze, reminding me that roots matter, and mine were still here, deep and unshaken. One by one, I unpacked the boxes from storage. I refused to let them sit in that cold unit any longer. My wedding dress, yellowed with age but still carrying the scent of lavender sachets, went back into the cedar chest. Richard's tools returned to their pegboard in the garage, each one polished and oiled. His medals, cleaned and gleaming, found their place on the mantel where visitors could see them. As I worked, the house began to breathe again. It no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like home. Friends stopped by often. Some brought casseroles. Others came just to sit and drink coffee at the kitchen table. The laughter that had been missing for so long slowly returned. Even neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years knocked on the door to tell me how proud they were that I stood my ground. "You reminded all of us," one neighbor said, "that we don't have to let anyone take what's ours, no matter how old we are." Her words sank deep, because that was the heart of it, wasn't it? They thought my age made me weak. They thought widowhood made me powerless. They thought love for my son would make me silent. They were wrong. But life has a way of softening edges, too. A few weeks later, I heard through the grapevine that Michael and Vanessa had moved into a small rental on the other side of town. They weren't doing well. The business scheme Michael had pinned his hopes on had fallen through, and Vanessa's family, once so proud, had grown distant after the courtroom disgrace. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a flicker of satisfaction. But alongside it was something else: sorrow. Because as much as they hurt me, Michael was still my son. Nothing could erase the years I had loved him. Even so, forgiveness doesn't mean foolishness. I forgave him in my heart, but I kept the trust intact. My house, my estate, would go to those who had stood by me. My nieces, my goddaughter, the friends who had become my chosen family. People who valued me for who I was, not what I had. One afternoon, my goddaughter Emily came over. She's only 12, bright-eyed, curious, with a laugh that lights up every room. She wandered into the living room, stared at the medals on the mantel, and asked, "Aunt Louise, will you tell me the stories behind these someday?" I smiled, pulling her close. "Yes, sweetheart. Every single one that moment sealed it for me. The future of this house wouldn't be built on entitlement or greed. It would be built on memory, on love, on legacy." As the weeks turned into months, I replanted the roses out front, just as Richard used to. Their buds began to bloom again, crimson and alive. Replaced the curtains Vanessa had mocked with ones I chose simply because they made me smile. The walls echoed with the sound of friends dropping by, of children's laughter drifting in from the yard. This house wasn't just mine. It was alive again. And as I sit here now, telling you this story, I want you to remember something. You are never too old to protect what is yours. You are never too weak to stand for your dignity. And sometimes, justice doesn't roar in anger. It speaks quietly, firmly, in a judge's ruling, in a gavel's strike, in the strength of a heart that refuses to be erased. They thought they had won when they moved my belongings to storage. They thought age would silence me. They thought widowhood made me helpless. But in the end, I still have my home. I still have my name. And I still have the truth. And that, my friends, is worth more than anything they could ever take. So tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Share it with me below. Because no matter where you are, no matter what you've been through, I want you to know you are stronger than they think. And if anyone ever tries to erase you, remember my story. Stand firm. Because sometimes the quietest victory is the loudest of all.